Story 1. Hey, my name is Maya. I'm 25 years old and living in the city with my boyfriend Kevin. Things have been a bit of a struggle lately, to be honest. Kevin lost his job a few months back and money's been really tight. We had been staying with my parents for a while to get back on our feet, but man, you know how it is living with parents as an adult. It just starts to weigh on you after a while. You feel like you've lost your independence. Kevin was going stir crazy just sitting around the house all day. We both were. So when we saw this suspiciously cheap apartment listing on Craigslist, it seemed too good to be true, but Kevin was desperate to get us out of my parents' place. I'll admit, I kind of loved the idea of having our own little nest again. You know, a fresh start. Despite the little voice of doubt in the back of my mind, we took it. I should have listened to that voice. It all started out pretty mundane and normal at first. The apartment was nothing fancy, just a basic one-bedroom in an older building on the rougher side of town, but it was clean. The landlord seemed nice enough, and hey, we could actually afford it. Those first few days, we were just relieved to be out on our own again. We went to the grocery store, cooked dinners together, and binged some shows on Netflix in the evenings. All that simple, blessed normalcy we had been craving. Petty disagreements about leaving dishes in the sink or whose turn it was to take out the trash. I missed those silly arguments when, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me try to explain what happened. The landlord's warning. It was probably around the fourth or fifth night. I woke up sometime after 11 p.m. to use the bathroom. As I was coming out, I heard the most terrifying sound, a woman screaming. No, screaming doesn't even describe it properly. It was this blood-curdling, ripping shriek of pure fear and agony. It made my blood run cold. I shook Kevin awake in a panic. Did you hear that? Someone's in trouble? We have to call the police. He tried to calm me down, saying it was probably just a TV or something from another apartment, but I knew what I heard. It wasn't normal. Right then, there was frantic knocking at our door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Kevin motioned for me to stay back as he carefully went over and opened it a crack. It was our landlord, Mr. Cack. He had this disturbingly casual smile on his face as he said, "No need for alarm, folks. Just a little disagreement between a couple tenants, but it's being taken care of, so no need to call the authorities, okay?" The way he said it with such a total lack of concern was so bizarrely off-putting, almost like he was amused by the whole thing. I shivered despite the warm night. "If you're sure, mister." Cat Kevin said uneasily, "We'd still hate to be a bother. We can call if anything else comes up." "Oh, there's no bother at all. But please, if you do happen to see or hear anything unsettling, don't go calling the cops, please. That never ends well for anyone, mister." Cack chuckled as if he just told a hilarious joke. "You two seem like such a nice, smart young couple. Why don't you just give me a ring directly if any future unpleasantness arises? I'll get it sorted out." He gave an overconfident wink, then without another word, turned and headed back down the dingy hallway, whistling some eerily cheery tune. I have to get us out, the looks Kevin and I exchanged in the wake of that supremely unsettling encounter said it all. We both knew deep down that something was deeply wrong here with Mr. Cack, with this whole place, but what choice did we have? We were broke, hadn't even unpacked all our things yet, so we tried our best to just ignore it, chalk it up to the landlord being some batshit old eccentric, and hope things didn't get any weirder. Oh, how I wish I could go back to the naive mindset of those first few nights again, unburdened by the sickening realizations that were still to come. It started with the small things at first, like hearing strange noises in the night. Not just screams this time, but occasional muffled thumps and the sounds of people frantically running up and down the halls, always at the most unholy hours between midnight and 4 a.m. Whenever I brought it up to Kevin, he got this glazed, half-asleep look in his eyes and denied hearing anything out of the ordinary. Part of me wondered if he was just trying to reassure me, to cling to some sense of normalcy in our new home. Another part of me knew he heard those noises too, and was just as terrified as I was. Then more bizarre events started occurring. Strangers would randomly knock at our door at all hours, just dazed-looking men reeking of booze or worse, muttering about Mr. Cack said it would be okay, or this is where I'm supposed to go. We stuck to the cardinal rule of never opening the door to those sketches, but the implications of what they were showing up for made my blood run cold. Kevin and I didn't even want to voice our darkest suspicions out loud. Things came to a head. Despite the escalating weirdness, we both felt so trapped. Neither of us had jobs at that point, and we'd blown what little savings we had on the move and security deposit. Where the hell else could we go? Then came the night that fully shattered any remaining illusions, the night that pushed us past the breaking point. I woke up around 2 a.m. to Kevin tossing and turning, mumbling incoherently in his sleep. I tried to gently shake him awake, growing more frantic as he wouldn't rouse. Finally, his eyes flashed open, wild and unfocused. He looked right through me with zero recognition. "Kevin, babe, what's wrong?" "You were having a night." That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a young woman crying, sobbing in pure hopeless despair. It seemed to be coming from the apartment next door. My heart stopped as I realized whatever nightmare had been plaguing Kevin, he likely heard those cries too, held the same horrific implications I did about what they meant. I wanted so badly to run out there, pound on that door, and demand to know what kind of depraved shit Mr. Cack was up to in this god-forsaken place. But I'd seen enough crime documentaries to know that's exactly how young women end up dead in abandoned lots. So we just sat there, petrified, listening to those tormented wails that went on forever. Eventually they trailed off into a deathly silence, even more chilling. I knew deep down we couldn't spend another night in this waking nightmare, not after that. The next morning we packed up as quickly and quietly as humanly possible. I didn't even give a shit about getting the security deposit back at that point. Nothing was worth sticking around that hellhole a second longer. As we were dragging our meager belongings out to the cab, Mr. Cack emerged from the shadows and flashed that same sickening grin. "Leaving so soon? I do hope every accommodation was to your liking during your stay." He let out this wheezy chuckle that made my skin crawl. Kevin urged me past without a word or eye contact. We never looked back. So there you have it. We got out, but so many mysteries remain. Just what kind of unspeakable depravities were happening behind those paper-thin walls? Who were those poor souls we heard screaming and crying out so desperately? And most of all, what did Cack mean by accommodation? Was he implying we were somehow complicit by our silence, by witnessing those horrors and doing nothing? I try not to dwell on it, but those questions still haunt me. If only we'd had the resources to go somewhere else right away. If only we'd found the courage to report Cack, no matter how ominous his warnings. If only. In the end, I suppose we'll never know the full truth. But one thing's for certain from now on, we're never taking too good to be true apartment listings on Craigslist ever again. Some horrors are better left undiscovered. Story 2. I'm Mark, just an ordinary guy, you know. I work a 9-to-5 office job, come home to my little apartment, heat up a frozen meal for one. Nothing too exciting. That all changed when I decided to move. See, my landlord raised the rent again, and I just couldn't swing it on my salary. I knew I had to find a cheaper place fast. That's when I made the mistake of looking on Craigslist for movers. Big mistake. There was this one listing, no job too big, sounded perfect for a guy on a budget. I sent Steve a message. and he replied within minutes. You need meaty guys who can get it done. I'm your man, easy as that. I hired him for the next weekend. Saturday morning, bright and early, there's a knock at my door. Steve is this hulking guy, over 6 feet tall with huge arms straining against his tight t-shirt. He had a shaved head and these intimidating eyes that seemed to stare right through me. Not the typical mover, but I figured beggars can't be choosers, you know. We started loading up his beat-up truck, making trip after trip up and down the rickety stairs to my 3rd floor. Apartment. Steve barely broke a sweat, but I was gasping for breath by the time we'd finished. As I handed over the cash, Steve gave me this intense look. You know, Mark, I like you. You're a hard worker. I just nodded awkwardly, eager to get him out of my life and start unpacking my new place. A week later, I started noticing things in my new apartment felt off. Random objects would be out of place, lights would flicker, strange sounds in the night. At first I thought it was just the stress of moving or my imagination running wild. But then I found the hidden cameras. Tiny, barely noticeable, but definitely there. One in the living room, another in the bathroom, even one in my bedroom. My blood ran cold. Who the hell would put cameras in my apartment? I called the police immediately. They came and checked everything, but without any solid proof of who did it or how they got in, there wasn't much they could do. They recommended changing the locks and installing an alarm system. I did both, but the feeling of being watched never went away. Every creak, every shadow seemed sinister. Then, one night I came home late from work and found my front door slightly ajar. I froze. Heart pounding, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The place was ransacked, furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, but nothing seemed to be missing. As I stood there in shock, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have called the cops, Mark. Now things get ugly. That was it. I was done. I packed a bag and drove to a friend's house, too terrified to stay another night in that apartment. I spent weeks crashing on their couch, trying to figure out what to do next. I even considered moving out of the city, just to get away from whoever was targeting me. But I couldn't afford it, and I knew running wouldn't solve anything. Eventually, I hired a private investigator. He managed to trace the cameras back to Steve. Turns out, Steve had a history of stalking and harassment, preying on people who hired him for moving jobs. The police arrested him, and he confessed to everything. The cameras, the break-in, the threats. He said he did it because he enjoyed the power, the control over his victims. Knowing he was behind bars helped, but the damage was done. I still jump at every noise, every unexpected movement. It's like the fear is permanently etched into my mind. So that's my story. A cautionary tale, I guess. Be careful who you trust, even for something as simple as a moving job. You never know what kind of nightmare you might be inviting into your life. Story 3. Hi there, I'm Sarah. I'm 29 and have been living in the city for about 5 years now. Life was pretty good, all things considered. I had a stable job as a graphic designer and a decent social life. That all took a turn for the worse when I found myself needing a roommate to help cover the rent after my last one moved out, unexpectedly. I decided to look for a new roommate on Craigslist. Huge mistake. I posted an ad, and within a couple of days I got a response from a woman named Jessica. She seemed nice enough over email, polite and articulate, and when we met in person, she seemed friendly and normal. She was around my age, worked as a nurse, and said she was looking for a quiet place to stay closer to her job. We hit it off pretty well, so I decided to let her move in. I was relieved to have found someone so quickly and easily. Jessica moved in on a Saturday. The first few days were perfectly fine. We were like two ships passing in the night due to our different work schedules. But then, things started to get weird. It began with small things. Items in the apartment were moved around, strange smells coming from her room, odd noises at night. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just getting used to living with someone new. About a week after she moved in, I came home one evening to find Jessica sitting in the living room with this blank, distant look on her face. I greeted her, but she didn't respond. It was like she was in a trance. It creeped me out, but I just assumed she had a rough day at work and needed some space. I went to my room and tried to ignore it. That night, I woke up to the sound of whispering coming from Jessica's room. It sounded like she was having a conversation with someone, but when I pressed my ear to the wall, I realized there was no other voice, just her. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but the tone was unsettling. I decided not to confront her about it, thinking it was probably just a weird habit, or maybe she was on the phone with someone late at night. Things escalated quickly after that. Jessica started acting more erratically. She'd lock herself in her room for hours, sometimes days, and when she did come out, she'd have these intense mood swings. One minute she'd be overly friendly, and the next, she'd snap at me over the smallest things. One night I woke up to find her standing at the foot of my bed, just staring at me with this vacant expression. I screamed and she backed away, muttering an apology before disappearing back into her room. I knew then that I needed to get her out of my apartment, but I was scared of how she'd react if I confronted her. I tried to stay away from the apartment as much as possible, spending nights at friends' places and staying late at work. When I was home, I kept my door locked and avoided Jessica as best as I could. One day I came home to find Jessica gone. Her room was completely emptied out, like she had never been there. She left no note, no message, nothing. I was relieved, but also deeply unsettled. Who just disappears like that? A couple of days later, I got a call from the police. They found Jessica. She had been living under a different name, and she was wanted for a series of violent crimes in another state. She had a history of mental illness and had been on the run for months. The police found her in a nearby town, and she was being held in custody. I was in shock. I couldn't believe I had lived with someone so dangerous, someone who could have harmed me at any moment. I changed the locks on my apartment and took a couple of weeks off work to process everything. It's been a few months now, and I'm still on edge, still looking over my shoulder. So that's my story. A reminder to be extremely careful when finding a roommate, especially through online platforms like Craigslist. You never really know who you're inviting into your home. Story 4. I was using Craigslist as a means of selling some of my old, unused things I had stashed away in my house. I had plans to move out in the next few months, so I was just trying to organize what I needed from what I didn't need, and that's when I found my old motor tools. They were high quality and still functional, but I had gotten battery-powered ones to replace them not long ago. With no use for them anymore, I took a couple of pictures and posted them up on Craigslist. I had listed a power drill driver and matching tool set for $80. Considering they weren't that old and still fully functional, this was a really good deal. It didn't take long to get responses. In just an hour, I got 2 replies to my post. One of them emailed me asking if $50 would be okay, but I politely declined. The other reply stated that they were very interested and wanted to buy them that same night for the listed price. I agreed and said I was available at 5 if he wanted to swing by and pick them up. I never let anyone into my house when selling things. I'd always just bring the stuff out to my driveway and talk to them there. It was a well-trafficked neighborhood street, so I wasn't worried about anyone attempting something out in the open. As I usually did, I was going to stand out in the driveway with the items a bit before 5 and wait for them so that I could make the transaction as quick as possible. But just past 4:30, there was a knock at the door. I looked out, seeing a man standing there with his red car parked in the driveway. I opened the door a crack, asking who he was. The man said he was here to buy the tools that were on Craigslist and admitted to being early. I told him to hold on for a minute and to just wait in his car, as I wasn't expecting him yet. He hesitated, making the interaction more awkward than it should have been, but then he turned around. Once he walked away, I got all the tools together and met him at the top of the driveway. I had an outlet outside for him to test the tools with, and he seemed satisfied with them. "How about 20, he said while holding the drill. The deal was 80. "I can do a little lower, but 20 is too low," I said nicely, though I was slightly annoyed because he had already agreed to pay 80 for them, and $20 was just a total ripoff. He put the drill down, and without even looking at me, he walked back to his car and drove away. I was confused and upset, feeling like I'd been played and just had wasted my time. I got the tools back inside and just went on with my night, trying not to let myself get too upset about it. Really, it was just a small inconvenience. At least that's what I thought. A couple of hours later, I walked by the front windows, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw that same red car. It was parked just down the road 3 houses away from mine. I looked closely, trying to be sure that it was that same man, but nobody was inside it. It was an empty parked car, so I had no way of knowing for sure. I convinced myself it was just a coincidence and carried on. Another hour would go by. I was just going on with my night, making food and watching TV, but then someone knocked on my door. I was a little shaken, but chose to ignore it and hope that whoever it was would go away. Obviously, the man from earlier was my first thought. Only 30 seconds passed before they knocked again. "Hey, it's me. I decided I'll take the tools. I brought the money," he yelled from the other side of the door. I didn't believe him at all. It all came together in my mind that that car that I'd seen an hour ago was his, meaning that he'd been stalking my house all night. I didn't respond and instead called the police, informing them of the man's name and the car he had. The man called out several more times saying he wanted to buy the tools, but then it went silent for a minute. I was still standing by my couch looking toward the front door. Another minute passed. I wasn't sure what to do. The police were already on their way and would be here any minute, so I felt safe enough to be able to check out the windows. I quietly walked over to the window that was beside the door, but then suddenly I heard something hit the side of the house with great force. The sound was followed by leaves rustling and footsteps running away. I looked out the window and saw the guy running with a limp down to his car. The police turned in at the perfect time, though, stopping him halfway. It surprised me to hear that the man admitted to a lot. He said he planned on robbing me, but I wouldn't let him into the house, which complicated things for him. Additionally, he tried climbing the tree on the side of my house and jumping onto the roof, but he missed, hitting the side and falling on his leg. The thing is, though, he was armed with a knife, and the roof he tried to jump on was just under my second-story window, which after checking was unlocked. So if he had made the jump, he actually would have gotten inside. He claimed it was just an attempted robbery, but claims are just that. I stopped using Craigslist, and even to this day I lock every single window in my house, even the ones that I think are unreachable. Story 5. I used Craigslist many years ago to find a room for rent. I was looking for a house to stay at and be able to split rent with a roommate or roommates. It took maybe a week to find a place that was suitable for me, and several phone calls with the owner before I was ready to move in. The owner, who was to be my roommate, seemed like a really normal, nice guy who was similar in age as me. He told me all about the place and what to expect, and I also felt like we connected well. With everything seeming perfect, I was getting really excited. I didn't have much to move, so I packed it all up and stuffed it in the trunk of my car, and in just a few days I drove out 30 minutes to my soon-to-be home. It was located outside of the main town and in more of a woodsy terrain. It had a long driveway leading far from the road. Pulling in, though, it was not as I'd expected. It was a very old wooden home. I knew it was passed down from his parents, but this place looked to be at least 100 years old. The pictures of the inside that I'd seen on Craigslist looked to be fairly modern, so I assumed they had to have done some pretty big renovations. I left everything in my car as I went up to the door and knocked. Aaron, the owner, came and showed me around. While the outside was not so impressive, the inside was the opposite, very well maintained, clean, and definitely had been renovated not long ago. I was really happy with everything and moved my things in that night. Several days went by with no issues. It didn't even feel like I'd found this place on Craigslist. It felt like I was just living with a friend. Aaron worked in town, though, so he was gone most of the time and I worked from home, so I got to have the whole house to myself. Well, not the whole house. There was one door that was always locked. It wasn't any of my business and I knew that, so I never brought it up with Aaron, but it still got me wondering. It was almost definitely the basement door, but this was odd because he said the house was a one-story home, not mentioning anything about having a basement. Another couple days went by before something happened. Aaron brought home some fast food for dinner and then went to bed early because he had worked the next day. I stayed up a while longer, then did the same. Laying in bed, though, I had trouble falling asleep. There wasn't any reason for this, it was just one of those nights. But after a while I heard Aaron's bedroom door open. I was listening because there was nothing else to do, but no sounds came. I waited a whole 2 or 3 minutes before he started walking slowly down the hall towards my door. Just as he was passing, though, he stopped. I heard the floorboards creak followed by the door thump softly, as if he was pressing up against it. He stayed there behind the door for a while. I don't even know how long, but then he walked away. Not back toward his room, but the other way toward the main hallway. Then a door opened and closed. I didn't know what to think. It was really weird and creepy, but also I'd known Aaron for a while now and didn't see him as a weird person. But what was he doing? And where did he go? I stayed awake as long as I could, waiting to hear him come back, but he never did. Over the next few nights I noticed the pattern. Every time I would go to bed, about 30 minutes later Aaron would open his door, stand still for a minute, then walk to my door, stand still again, then leave and go into the locked door. He never slept in his room, he always slept somewhere behind the weird locked door. What made it so creepy was that he was trying so hard to keep a secret from me. I decided one night that I was going to figure this all out because I was beginning to feel unsafe. I went to bed and waited for Aaron to do his usual routine. He opened his bedroom door and walked over to mine. Then, as always, he stood there before leaving into the locked door. As soon as he shut the door behind him, I quietly got up and snuck over to his room. I found his keychain that he would usually bring to work with him, and on it was a small single key that looked to be used for a padlock. That had to be the one for the locked door. I took it and waited until morning before sneaking back to bed. I got out of bed later that morning and tried the key out. It worked and the door opened. Down the stairs was nothing but empty, dark space. It was a basement, but I could barely see anything in it. Using my phone's flashlight, I walked down and began looking around. But the only thing I could find in there was a single long box sitting in the far corner. It looked like a human-sized box and was nailed shut. A couple of tools lay scattered around the room, and it seemed like Aaron was trying to open it himself. I got the crowbar that was on the floor and got to work on it. After a while, the lid popped off, and inside was a body. It looked like it had been there a very long time, because there was no longer any hair on it and the skin was pulled tight around the bones. There were no eyes either, just empty sockets. I left the basement and the house altogether. I didn't even bother grabbing my stuff, I just drove away. I don't know if Aaron was a murderer or if it was someone else who had killed that person, but I didn't want to risk finding out. That was the last time I used Craigslist for anything. Story 6. I was moving into a new apartment, and my girlfriend and I were looking for furniture to fill the place up with. The two of us had a shared account and not much money to spend, so getting anything brand new was out of the question. After searching around town for a bit, we decided Craigslist might have a good amount of used furniture for cheaper. I searched around and found some listings, but nothing that looked great. It wasn't until a few days later that I saw someone selling a couch and matching chair set for only $25. I thought it had to be a typo, but I messaged him, and he confirmed that he just wanted it out of his house. We arranged a time to pick it up, and since I had a truck, the trip would only take one go. When I arrived at the address, I had a very uneasy feeling about the place. It was an older home in a rundown part of town. I got out and knocked on the door. The man opened it right away. He was older, maybe in his mid-50s, and had a scruffy beard. He smiled and invited me in. I hesitated but decided to just get this over with. Inside, the house was cluttered and dirty. I followed him to the living room where the furniture was. The couch and chair were actually in great condition, which made me feel a little better. We chatted briefly as I examined the furniture. He seemed nice enough, just a guy trying to clear out his home. I paid him the $25 and he helped me load the couch and chair into my truck. I thanked him and left. After getting the furniture back to the apartment, my girlfriend and I started to clean it. That's when we found something strange. Tucked between the cushions of the couch was a small envelope. Inside were several old photographs. They were black and white and looked to be very old. But the thing that really got to me was that the people in the photos looked terrified. In one, a woman was standing in front of a large house with her hands tied behind her back. Another showed a man sitting in a chair with what looked like ropes around his wrists and ankles. We decided to call the police and show them the photos. An officer came by and took our statements. He said they'd look into it, but he didn't seem too concerned. We never heard back from them. My girlfriend was so freaked out that she didn't want the furniture in our apartment anymore. We ended up throwing it away. To this day, I wonder who those people in the photos were and what happened to them. I also wonder about the man who sold me the couch. He seemed so normal, but those photos suggested something far more sinister. I've never used Craigslist again after that. Story 7. I use a lot of sites like Craigslist for the same reasons everyone else does. You can find expensive things for really discounted prices or even just cheap things for even cheaper. I don't have a ton of money, and using these sites are sometimes essential when it comes to getting things like furniture that's usually really expensive to buy anywhere else. This happened when I was looking around for a dining room table. Ours was really old, and my whole family used it as a place to eat and as a workspace, so it's been through a lot over the years. I went around on Facebook Marketplace and OfferUp, but neither had anything good. Most of them were still expensive, and even when I tried to bargain with a few of the sellers, none of them would budge. So then I went to Craigslist. Around here, I think most people use other sites nowadays, but Craigslist still always had the cheapest deals, though they were still somewhat rare to find. But almost as soon as I opened up the site and hit enter on the search bar, a really good listing showed up. It was a very basic wooden dining table that didn't have much wear on it, and the seller posted it for only $100, compared to the $400 to $500 everyone else was listing things for. This was a steal. I sent a message saying I'd love to check it out and would be willing to pay the full price. He didn't reply immediately, so I just took a break and hung out with my kids. Until around 7, when they went to their rooms to get ready for bed, I went back to my laptop and found a response from just a couple of minutes ago. It was a very quick few sentences saying he was sorry, but the table was going to be thrown out tomorrow morning. But if I really wanted it, I'd have to come by tonight or any time before 5 a.m. tomorrow. It was weird that he'd be willing to sell it at any time during the night, and his reasoning didn't make all that much sense to me. But after some thought, I replied back saying I could pick it up right now. I didn't want to go there really late into the night or super early in the morning, but it was only 7, so I didn't see a problem if I was able to go right now. The man replied quickly, agreeing and sending the address. It was only 10 minutes from my place, so I let my wife know what was going on and where I'd be, then headed out. From context clues, you probably already know that I don't live in a lavish area, so when I say the seller's house was really worn down, I mean it was really worn down. It was small like the others in our area, but the yard was full of trash and random other things, surrounded by a thin chain link fence. I parked on the side and opened the fence, walking through the yard and up to the door, which was already open. I could hear some people talking and laughing. I peeked inside and gave a light knock on the door. Right away, a man came around the corner and invited me in. He looked like he was in late college, somewhere in his mid-20s. As I stepped inside, though, I couldn't help but notice how disgusting the whole place was. There were beer cans laying around and stains in the carpet. It looked like a really poorly taken care of house where they had probably hosted hundreds of college parties. The man was very laid back, though, casually walking me down the hallway and into the kitchen while talking about how he didn't have room for the table anymore. When we got to the kitchen, there were 2 other men, looking about the same age, standing against the wall, seemingly in the middle of a conversation. Next to them was the table. Somehow it looked almost untouched. I didn't know how that was possible considering the rest of the house. I walked around it and checked to see if it was stable and whatnot, but as I did, the house suddenly went quiet. The 2 talking had stopped, and the man selling the table didn't speak either. I looked up, seeing them all staring at me. Did I do something? I asked, looking around at each of them. When my eyes fell on one of the men closest to me, though, I noticed that his pupils were massive, something that only being drugged up could achieve, but what he was on, I didn't know. Regardless, in that moment I knew this wasn't right. Not only was this getting strange, but I didn't want to buy a table that's been in this kind of house and used by these sorts of people. I think I'm going to pass on it. Thank you, though, I said softly. I started walking toward the hallway, but one of them stepped in front of me. He didn't say anything, he just stood there, blocking the way out. Something about the way they were all looking and acting, I could tell that whatever this was planned out, and they likely never meant to sell the table. My face fell with fear as the anticipation of just standing there surrounded by these strangers began to overwhelm me. But then one of them stepped over and whispered something in the other's ear, and they moved aside, still not saying anything. I cautiously walked between them, hurrying down the hallway and out the door. A lot of things went through my head on the drive home. I knew that they were planning something horrible, but what that was, and why they ended up letting me go, I'm not so sure of. When I got home, I told my wife, who convinced me to call the police and report it, but they couldn't do anything without anything having happened. So whatever those men were planning, I'll probably never know. I just hope someone else doesn't have to find out. Story 8. I want to talk about an important sponsor for today's video. Aura is an advanced online digital security service allowing you to scan and remove your personal data from various online sources, including scam centers, the dark web, and data brokers. These entities profit from your private information, making it crucial to eliminate your data from their reach, and Aura makes it as simple as possible for us to do this. With their free trial, I was registered in minutes and had Aura scan and remove my data with just a few clicks. They notified me about dozens of places all across the internet where they found my personal data, like my full name, phone number, and address. And without Aura, I never would have known. Afterwards, Aura continuously monitors my data, instantly notifying me of any issues that arise and enabling swift resolution. They also include a feature to encrypt your home's Wi-Fi, ensuring the security of all your connected devices. In today's world, personal identity and data theft are unfortunately widespread, affecting a significant number of U.S. citizens, with millions falling victim each year, resulting in huge financial losses. With Aura, you can have the utmost confidence in your security and prevention measures. For a completely free 14-day trial, visit aura.com/whispered or scan the provided QR code. During this trial, you can discover if your personal data has been compromised, remove your data from multiple prominent platforms, and securely monitor your personal identity. I highly recommend using this free trial to see if your data has been stolen and to keep your identity secure. Thanks again to Aura for sponsoring this video and keeping our personal data secure. Story 9. I was selling some of my shoes on Craigslist a year ago just to pocket some extra cash. I wanted to move out of my old apartment in a few months and was hoping to get some money to help pay for movers. The shoes were nothing special, but I listed them for generous prices, hoping to get them bought quickly. I guess Craigslist wasn't the best place for shoes though, because it took a whole week before I got a single offer. It was some guy whose email had the name John K in it, and he offered just $5 less than my listing price. It seemed like an unnecessary adjustment to the original price, but I didn't want to keep waiting for more offers, so I wrote him back saying I was okay with that. We set up to meet the following day at 5 in the parking lot of a public gas station in the middle of town. The next day I sent a text and he confirmed that he was on his way, so I left as well and got to the gas station right at 5. They weren't there yet, but there was a lot of traffic on the roads, so I figured he'd be late. I sat in my car patiently, and over the course of 30 minutes, the road cleared up and the sun started coming down. Then John finally pulled in. He drove a small sedan with none of the headlights working and resembling something from a scrap yard. He parked next to me and got out. John looked like he was in his 30s and was a pretty large guy, wearing ripped-up clothes and having long, unkempt hair. He didn't say much, so I brought out the shoes and let him look at them. As he held them, though, he didn't say anything. He kept looking back at the gas station. I don't know what he was looking at, but after he checked over his shoulder multiple times, I glanced over as well. The gas station was empty aside from one guy putting gas in his car, but otherwise, I didn't know what he could be looking at. John was taking his time though, pointlessly looking over everything multiple times as if they were some really rare shoes that he was going to drop hundreds on. But these were just some regular sneakers, nothing fancy or rare. Then John looked over his shoulder one more time, just as the guy at the gas station started to leave, making the station entirely empty. My sense of danger peaked, and I got this heavy feeling of dread, something I can only describe as the feeling of knowing something bad was about to happen. I didn't want to think that this guy was about to try and rob me, but my instincts and body were telling me otherwise. I guess John noticed my change in expression, because he suddenly started talking in a quiet and almost fast manner, trying to keep me distracted. I just barely heard a car engine roaring from down the road, which was already dark now, and I looked back at John. He turned and quickly walked back to his car, only mumbling something about not having money on him right now. Then he got in his car and drove away. I stood there for a moment, confused, but got back in my car when he was gone, locking the doors and turning on the engine. Almost immediately after that, a car pulled into the gas station, driving right up to my car and blocking the way out. 3 guys got out, but by then I had put my car in reverse and drove around the gas pumps, getting out onto the street and heading home. I don't know if they were there for me or John, but I think it was safe to assume that John was planning on wasting time until they arrived, likely so they could rob me or worse. I stopped selling on Craigslist for a long time after that, but even now I feel like it could happen again whenever I meet strangers for these things. Story 10. This story happened to my husband after we bought our house together in 2019. We moved in late September, and after taking a week off work to help get everything settled in, he went back to work as an on-call construction worker. This meant that he would usually be home most of the day, until late at night or early morning when he would have to leave for a job. He was usually home around this time since winter made it hard for his company to do much work, and while I still worked a 9-5, he spent a lot of his time hanging around the house or going out to get things for the house that we needed. One of the things he wanted to get was a nice coffee table to match the one we had in our bedroom. This time he decided to use Craigslist. I don't know why he chose Craigslist over other things like Facebook Marketplace or Letgo, but for some reason he did. A day after looking around on the site, he found a really good deal on a coffee table for just $60. He told me he messaged the guy and that he was supposed to meet him in a parking lot behind a bar later that night. He wasn't going to be able to make it, but he asked if I would be willing to go. The only problem was, he had an important job to go to and wouldn't be home until midnight, but I wasn't comfortable going alone. Eventually, we decided it would be best to pick it up the next day, as the man had said he was free most days. The next morning, I took the day off work, and after letting the man know, we got a response a couple of hours later and drove to the bar, which was only about 15 minutes away. It was 11 a.m. when we got there, and the place was entirely empty. The only other car in the parking lot was some old pickup truck that had clearly been there for a long time. The man said he would be in a blue sedan, but there wasn't one anywhere to be seen. So we waited, and after 20 minutes, my husband sent a text asking how long it would be before he got here. A minute later, he got a response, and I remember this clearly. The man said, "Look to your right." I looked up at my husband, confused. He leaned forward to look out his window and started turning his head right, but I grabbed his arm and told him to wait. I don't know what it was, but something about it just didn't feel right. So he put his phone down and just backed out of the parking lot, and we left. Neither of us knew what was going on, but whatever it was, we were sure it wasn't good. The guy sent a few more texts over the next few minutes, asking where we went and when we were coming back. Eventually, my husband just told him we weren't interested anymore, and he blocked his number. I hate to think of what might have happened, but it couldn't have been good. So if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, trust your gut, because that's the only thing that kept us safe.